everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. Thanks for joining us today. I have a really cool session to present to you. We've got a really interesting topic, the do's and don'ts of learning design in virtual reality with our guest, Monique St Paul. So thanks for joining us today, Monique. Let's see, who do we have in today so far? A good group already. Let's see, Mark Brown, Andrea Mack, Carlita's here, Rachel, Quetzal, Lisa Crockett, Kat Cassidy, Mike Peacock, Valerie Dorota, Kathleen. Gosh, we've got a bunch. So yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation. So I was so glad to talk to Monique. I don't remember. I think it was like during Community Day or something, or maybe prior to that we had talked, and it was compelling because you are an instructional designer and someone that seemed like pretty much maybe like an archetype of an instructional designer, but you were like involved with building out virtual reality. And I don't meet many of your type. So I'm like, wow, this is very cool. And like one of the conversations we had was about how, you wouldn't consider yourself the most tech savvy kind of person. You were on like you're like, the story you had related to me was that you were using a Roku One, which I related to really well because, we use Roku here at home, and I don't know what version I'm on, but I'm like, Roku One, I haven't been able to use that device in like 5 years, and you're still using the same one. So I was super impressed with that. And I'm like, how is she doing VR then? So,
Right.
So here you are. So thanks for being willing to participate in this conversation.
No, I'm very excited to be here. I loved Community Day and have really enjoyed the TLDC community so far.
Okay.
And I hope I can answer as many questions as possible today and share my experience of being someone that a friend has said I'm very much a Luddite, because I still had a tube TV not that long ago, to be honest with you. And usually most of my electronics are hand-me-downs from friends upgrading it. So the fact that I work in virtual reality is insane, but I certainly do enjoy it.
It's a big deal. I love that. That's great. And folks in the audience, in the chat, we do have a bunch of questions already in the ask a question area. So please feel free to add any questions that you have. We'll be answering those as we go through this broadcast. And of course, I read off stuff that is in the chat area. So when you post things, if it's something that is relevant to the conversation, I'll definitely bring it up because I want that as part of the podcast, which I release later. Okay, so I think we'll just get started here. And we talked about this before we went live, but you're an instructional designer. How did you get involved in instructional design, and what exactly is your background? Like I had mentioned, looking at your LinkedIn profile, you were a marketer for a long time.
I was. So I was in marketing since I graduated from undergrad, and I realized that I liked it, but I didn't like it that much. And so I decided to go to grad school, and my focus was in learning and development. And I just handed in my last assignment yesterday, so I'm pretty excited about that. And I ended up joining ATD, so the Association for Talent Development. And there I met one of my mentors who introduced me to my current boss. And he knew that I was still sort of looking for a role in learning and development. I was thinking about being a live trainer. And he was just like, well, they're looking for an instructional designer. How do you feel about that? And I thought, yeah, I'll give it a whirl. I like the idea of creating a learning experience. And just as someone who's also part of Toastmasters, I've always liked the idea of creating a speech and helping people figure out what's going on. So instructional design wasn't that hard of a leap. And I decided to do it, and it worked out. And I'm here now.
That's great. And then the other thing I want to mention, which I found particularly interesting, is that you are an ATD chapter president now.
Yeah. Yes, I am. Yeah, I would not encourage people to be a student and a full-time employee and a president of an organization. It's a poor idea. But I was their marketing chair for a year. And then when the outgoing president left, we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do, and I agreed to do it. And so it's a great organization to be part of, I think, particularly if you're new to L&D. And so for me, it was just a great stepping stone to sort of understand more about people technology, what that meant, and definitely the resources. I'm sort of obsessed with watching the webcasts that they have available.
Nice. So, and all of this has pretty much happened within the last couple of years.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
This entire journey, I'm like, wow, okay, this is normally a decade's worth of experience, but you've done it in 2 years. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I when I like something, I go fast. It's one of those things you can tell. I get pretty immersed in it, no pun intended. Well, pun intended, pretty quickly. So I like
Yeah.
it.
All right. And so here you are, you're this instructional designer, and then you have this opportunity to start creating learning experiences in VR. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I did, like I said, my mentor connected me to my current boss. We did sort of like a trial run, and I started working with one of our clients. And at first, I thought I was just consulting. Little did I know that would become a job. And I loved it. You hear so much about people not liking their subject matter experts or that they're difficult to work with. And I've been very blessed with the people that I've worked with. I've loved them for so many different reasons. And I've worked on 3 projects so far, and each of them are completely different. And 2 of them are educational institutions, and then the other one I can't say what it is, but they work in the medical field. And it's it's been very different because 2 of them I just do virtual reality, and then one of them I do virtual reality and the e-learning for them. So I do still get the more traditional part of instructional design on top of doing the virtual reality.
Wow. And so what does your team look like?
There are 8 of us all together, well, not including our intern. So that's going to be me as the only instructional designer, but we do have people who have been educators before, so I lean on them on occasion. We have developers, I want to say 4 altogether, and then someone who works in analytics, and then our general manager as well, and an artist, a technical artist.
Who do you work most closely with? Like, who do you spend your time with the most?
It's interesting. So as a team, I don't work with the development team too often. We recently changed some of that, and it's actually one of the things that I regretted from the beginning is that I tended to work alone. And then it occurred to me that there's this whole team of experts of people who know what they're doing, and to start talking to them more often, because a lot of what they're discussing is super technical and goes above my head. But if they know where I was standing, where I created the simulation, or what I was thinking about when I decided to do certain things, it helps them understand what to design.
Wow. Okay. So I kind of want to understand what your workflow is like. Like, say, well, just I guess just that. Like, what do you do? Like, as an instructional designer from start to finish, like on your projects. What is that looking like? And I think that the part that is intriguing to me is how you relate to your SMEs and relate to your developers, and just kind of how that process works.
Sure. So I'm not right now part of the contract process. So when we do our kickoff calls the first time that I meet them and we go, here's a subject, I think like most instructional designers, you have to decide whether or not it's actually a training problem or is it something else? And I think for me, what's difficult also is how do we translate this into VR? Why does it matter, and what is the importance of creating it in a way that is so immersive? So when you think about designing for VR, you think about 3 senses in particular: touch, which is a little bit limited just because you're using controllers, and then what can you see and what can you hear? Those are what you see and what you hear are super important because that's going to help build the experience for you. And that's when you're trying to create what's going on, what the learning is about, where you're driving it. So from there, we talk to our subject matter experts. I usually work with them alone, get a little bit more information. If I'm lucky, I have some understanding of the other parts of their learning program. So for some of them, I have no concept. And then others, I have like completely see their e-learning portions, what they do live. And then that way give me a better sort of understanding of where I'm going to design, how I'm going to integrate the virtual reality part into their total learning program. And once I'm done with that, I'll sit by myself typically and try to come up with something. And then I'll bring it to our team and give them sort of like, this is what I'm thinking. What do you guys think? And from there, they'll either laugh and tell me no, because sometimes I can be too far out there. You know, my boss always encourages us to think super wide. What, you know, if you could have anything you wanted, what would you do? And then we go through the process of, well, how much time do we have? What is it within scope? What makes sense for the training? We sort of drill it down, and the developers will give me ideas as to, yeah, we could totally do that. That's a great idea, but that's going to have to be version 2. Like, we're not going to be able to get it done for this. So you have to build on it like you would a typical course. And then from there, we start building. And our dev team will work, and I'm introduced into some of those meetings as well. I'm not always with them, but they will start to create it, and then we'll start to get what we call sprint reviews. So every 2 weeks we have deliverables, and we will go through it. They'll do it. They'll cast it actually for us, so we don't have to be in VR. And then we'll go over the process of like what's working, what isn't working. I'll be there to sort of drop the hammer of like, this doesn't have anything to do with the learning objectives, and trying to stay on focus there. And then once we're done with that, we do show the client as we're working with it to make sure that we're moving in the right direction.
Interesting. So, is working with SMEs in this kind of a scenario very different from, like, say, your typical instructional design project? Because I know that you're focused on the three things: the touch, and the and the site and the audio. So, do you have to work with your SMEs in a different way?
I don't think it's too different, but I think there's a little bit more education of what is possible for them is one of the things that I think is interesting. And some people know exactly what they want in training, and others go, we have no idea, whatever you want. And so, and I'm like, no, it's not quite what I want. It's what you want. And you need to sit with them and sort of think like, what specifically are you trying to train, and why are you trying to train it? And then understand what you're able to capture to make sure that when we're done with our simulations, that we're able to pass on information that's beneficial to their organization and meets their business goals.
Interesting. So the projects that you're doing or that you've done, are they things that have replaced, like, say, like an e-learning, thing, or are they all like sort of brand new where folks are like, we need to do this in virtual reality?
So one of our clients has worked with us before, so they loved what we did for them previously. So what we're doing with them is on a continuing education basis. So that's just to earn credits, which is super nice. I really liked that project because I felt like I could create what I wanted. And I think the team was really supportive of just figuring out, because the client already had experience with us, so they trusted us a little bit more. And working with their SMEs was very, very specific. Like, we always had very notes and listed out. And when I would meet with them, it was like, here are the 10 things we need to talk about. Because of course, when you're working with people, everyone that I work with is in the healthcare field, doesn't have times. And that's one of the biggest problems, I think, of people with SMEs in general. They don't have the time, but on top of it, they're not in front of their desk. They're what they refer to as deskless employees. So they're not sitting in front of their computer like, I am most of the day. So to get their time, you have to get in quickly and ask very specific questions to drill down what you need.
Wow. Okay. All right. So let me get into like storyboarding and tools a little bit. So how much do you storyboard for VR, or is that something you even do?
I personally do not, but we have someone on our team who does. So I work with her, and a lot of that actually has more to do with my graphic inabilities than it does that I can't do it. But we walk through it. I tend to use Excel a lot, which is funny. Just really from my prior job, I used to work in Excel sheets all the time. So I think it just sort of stuck to organize information. And I also will just write in Word. So we take that together and talk them through. And what she will do is create a flow sheet of how it all works. So for the dev team, they need to know all of the variables that are there, and then they build in logic. So very similar, I think, if you were creating an e-learning course, if the person says yes, if the person says no, where does this go? So they do the same thing for the dev team, and they build that out in a flow sheet. And then also we create a storyboard for the client so that they have an understanding of what we're creating. And if we already have assets within the simulation, we'll try to take pictures so that they get an understanding of what the layout of the simulation will look like.
Okay. And so you're working off a spreadsheet. So this person that does the or the graphic design for you? Is she just a graphic designer, or does she have another
No,
role?
no,
No.
she's a unicorn. She's fabulous. She was an educator before for high school students, so she has done AR. She also does AR for us and VR. She is a Scrum Master, so project management end of that, as well as someone who's just like a creative sort of director, very good in sort of storytelling and trying to figure out whether things will work. So she kind of works both sides. Often she'll come to client meetings with me as well, just to get an understanding and hear what they're saying so that we know
Mhm.
how to translate that to the dev team.
Nice. Okay. And so, how about tools? Now, I know that you're not doing any of the actual development or using Unity or anything like that, but what kind of tools do you use aside from spreadsheets to,
So for me, not too many. So they being the development team uses Jira as their project management tool. And
Mhm.
so at first it was interesting because I wasn't on the Jira board at all, but they would ask me questions. So if we needed an intro to a simulation, they would just email me, but that wasn't tied to anything. So we eventually decided, well, Monique needs to be on the board. And I started to see really what it meant to create a simulation. And so it's all these very similar to probably like Trello, I guess, where you can see like the little individual cards and everybody's
Mhm.
assigned a name and then you can add on. So if they need copy, a lot of times that's where I come in. It's when it gets to that stage, I don't use too much. And then I have used Smartsheet. A lot of my stuff is more project management based. And
Yeah.
that's one of our clients. And then I also use an e-learning. Lessonly is one of the LMSs that I use.
Wow. So you, as far as instructional design is concerned, it's pretty much traditional processes.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, you're not getting into anything that is like tech wise, super complicated or crazy.
no, I get to listen to it, but I don't have to do it. So we build in Unity and Unreal. So for those of you who know, that's gaming engines, and they say a lot of stuff that totally goes over my head. But you start to pick up the language with them, and it's simple things. IK, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's like how people's bodies move in VR. And so they have like avatars. And at first I was like, well, what exactly does that mean? Or an NPC, which is a non-playing character, or non-player character. These are like little things that when you asked about the SMEs that I do have to explain to them when I say like, oh, so they're against the computer. And I'm like, right, there's going to be against the computer works as an NPC that, that's who they'll be talking to at the time. Thank you,
Wow.
Greg, for inverse kinetics. I appreciate that. I looked it up. I know they talk about it all the time. And we do things like collision, which is essentially you aren't able to walk through the wall. That's something that we have to think about when we create a simulation. Is it's sort of the way that I would look at virtual reality is it's sort of like film, in that you create your own world and you're able to do really whatever you want. But then you have to think about all these things like, does your hand go through the phone when you go pick it up? And how does that
Mhm.
work? And how does the person know how to grab, and assigning
Yeah.
all of the buttons on the controllers?
That is really interesting. It kind of segues well into this next question. How is designing for VR different from e-learning or or instructor-led training?
Well, it's interesting because I've only done it for this. So since this
Uh,
is my first job in the L&D environment, I've only had to do it this way. And to me, I honestly don't think it's that different. I think what's different is you have more options. So the way that I look at it is for something like e-learning, you might have the ability to use templates if you're using, something like Storyline or Articulate. Um, but with mine, you're completely creating that from scratch. And I think eventually the industry is going to move where you are going to be able to do it on your own. But most of the time, you're going to be working with developers who create that for you.
mhm, mhm. I'm really curious about this, but with an instructional design background and you saw this opportunity pop up for virtual reality, I mean, was there what kind of, did you have any hesitancy at all about like, I can't do that. That's virtual
Oh,
reality. Yeah.
of
Like what
course
went through your mind?
I was totally. I didn't. I thought I was being crazy, to be honest. But particularly since it was in the middle of COVID, like it started, so I was still working when I started working with the company that I work with now, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And part of it was because in my head I was going to be a live trainer. And I'm like, well,
Mm.
that makes sense. You like to connect with people in person. You don't have to worry about the tech side. Like virtual trainers, I give them props for having to not only present but also deal with the tech, because I certainly couldn't. I'm very like nervous about that, about what's going to
Mhm.
happen. But I wasn't sure. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be good at this. I don't know if I can actually get people to learn. And that really freaked me out. And it worked out that some of the people that I've met since I started working at my company are really just well versed in what they do. So one of the
Mhm.
people I was introduced to is very heavy on data analytics and evaluation. And he would look at me and be like, don't worry about it. You're going to get there. Like you don't need to get there today, but you're
Mhm.
going to, you're building the process of what's going on. And in that spreadsheet after a kickoff call, what I do is I write like, here's what the problem is. Here's what we want to change. And then like, here's, what it should look like at the end. And having that always gives me like a basis of being able to go back. And I think just talking to people within the community has always helped, of just like, well, what happened when you started? And,
Mhm.
I listen to other people and they're just like, well, this was my first e-learning course and it's like stick figures. So it doesn't make me feel as bad. And also I can't screw it up in the sense that I'm not the only person on the team.
Mhm.
So even if I had a terrible idea, they would help build it back up to something that was worthy.
Is there any particular quality or something that you do, um, that has that got you the job basically, or that makes you competent within this team? Because what I'm wondering is like, I'm sure that there are instructional designers out there that are like, oh man, VR, that is like way beyond what I'm capable of. It's like so technically complicated or whatever. But is there anything that you could say about that, like being able to just jump into it the way that you did?
I think you need to be flexible and I think you need to be willing to learn. So when I started, I didn't have a headset, and I've gotten one since. I have an Oculus Quest 2 at this point, and I was like, what does that mean? You go from someone who had, a tube TV to having an Oculus Quest 2. And it's weird to like put it on and think like you can explore and you can have fun with this. And I
Mhm.
think I needed to understand the medium a little bit. And I listened to the people that I work with. We talk all of the time about just different features of things. And well, did you ever play this game or did you ever play this? And there was one that I particularly liked. And now that I've seen that, I think, man, I should have done that for like a soft skills thing. And it's the
Mhm.
Key, which is free for anyone who has a headset. And it's about immigrants who are out of, was the word that refugees, sorry, is the word that I was looking for. And the way that it was done was so beautiful. It wasn't real time, not real time. It wasn't real world. It gives you like this option to go through it and you feel like the sense of loss and all these other things. And then you get to the end and explain sort of what happens. And I'm like, man, I wish I could create that. But I think it takes time to get to that point.
Mhm. Mhm. Lisa was asking, how does the VR piece differ from the straight ID piece of your job? Is that something that you could actually speak on? I know since I mean, I don't know how much like straight ID you've done since you've been like pretty much involved in virtual reality most of your instructional design career. But is that something you could speak to at all?
So I do the e-learning, and that is, I won't say that it's easier for me, but I think it makes more sense to me. And I think part of that again is that I get to work alone with that, and so it's like my ideas, and I can play with them. It's me and just the me at that
Mm-hmm.
point. And I think what's different is it's very set.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very obvious way, here are your learning objectives. This is what you're going to learn. Here are some interactions that are going to go in between that. There's a possible quiz at the end or some sort of interaction. So I'm a little bit more comfortable with that. Whereas in VR, I think you have to overcome some of the limitations of VR. So there are really great things, the fact that it's immersive and that people aren't looking at their phone while they're doing it. But at the same time, you have to overcome the hurdle of the fact that a lot of people don't understand VR or haven't used it. You don't want them in it too long. So most of our simulations are about 15 minutes. So it's a very short period of time to put a lot in. And then also, like, how do you evaluate? You don't want them reading tons of text in VR. The way that I look at it is the same way as like creating captioning. Is you want it to be short, you want it to be brief. You don't want them, can you represent this visually anyway? And does it make sense for the user to be able to do that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, no, that's great. That's good to know. There's some really, really well. Here's the most popular sort of upvoted question, which is, what level of input do you have on final design?
I chuckle because not tons. I think at the beginning of the process I have a lot more, but then once it's out of my hands and starts to get into coding world, it becomes a not Monique problem, but where I sort of stick my hands in is just like, this has to meet the learning objectives, and if it doesn't, then we shouldn't be doing it. And that's constantly what I'm asking is, does this make sense? Why are we adding this? Does this help the learner use what they need? Is this any way connected to anything else that they're learning in their program? Or are we just adding it because it's cool? And I think that's one of the harder parts of VR, is that people are fascinated by it and they think it's cool, but at the end, we won't continue to have clients if it's just cool and no one learns anything. So I spend a lot of time raising my voice in meetings that this has to make sense as to what they asked us to do in terms of training. So some input, but some of it's just me talking.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's a great answer. Thank you. Now, what do you think VR is best used for? Like soft skills or technical skills?
It could be both. I would say soft skills has, in my opinion, probably a better impact. I think it's harder to create because there's just so much more that you can do in terms of storytelling there that I think that you can't do on a practical side. But on the technical end, and I haven't had to do too many technical sort of situations, but I know like a lot of times it's been used for like surgeries, and how do you do that and give the person practice? And I think right now in particular, because medical students can't go into simulation labs, that's one of the greatest ways. Like if you were practicing like how to do an autopsy or something like that, typically in your experience, you only have one chance to do it with a cadaver. But like in virtual reality, you can re-hone those skills over and over again. And I think that's sort of the benefit of having it. And just another answer to that would be, if you have less than 50 users, you're not going to want to do virtual reality. You're probably going to want hire 100 or more before you even start to think about it. And then of course there is the budget end of it as to how many people you're actually going to serve, how often are you going to serve them, and then how many people are on the team. So our team is actually very small. If you were doing this, like, do you need voice actors? Do you want licensed music? Do you need any graphics that are going to be, that you're going to have, copyrighted? So all of that's going to add cost to your simulation.
I love some of these comments here. Like Leonard is saying, a balance between the amazement of immersion and goal for training is tough, but it's necessary.
Yeah. I get on my soapbox, Leonard. I promise.
And Valerie saying, in the end, with clients, I assume you have to demonstrate ROI, especially with something as expensive as VR.
Most definitely. And I think that talks to sort of evaluation, is how do you do it? So we've done it where we've done self-evaluation and then provided them an evaluation. We've also done it in the case of the continuing education credits. There are very specific things. So they have like a quiz at the end, and like you have to hit, I want to say for them, it's 70% in order for that to work. So it does matter. And you also have to think about what you're tracking. So if you're doing something like soft skills, tone of voice is something. And that's, again, paying attention to sort of what you hear and what you see is, can you capture that? Can you record it? Can you have someone change the way they did it the first time versus the way they did it the last time? And it's being able to hear that. And also we give them a dashboard to be able to see all these analytics as well so that they can go in. So that's our analytics person. And I swear he is the only person who knows what he's talking about in meetings. But I listen to it because he takes my spreadsheets and makes it into, this was the question, this was the answer, this is how many times. And so like I get fun out of it because my spreadsheets mean something to someone at some point.
That's great.
It is.
All right. So how about this one? How effective is the learning transfer, do you think?
It depends on what it is. So the projects that I've worked on are still fairly new, so we don't have tons of data on that just yet. The continuing education one makes the most sense because you know exactly what they learned, and I think that one is a little bit easier in that it's labeling. Can you label the parts of the lung? Can you tell me what they do? Can you hear what this EKG sounds like? And can you identify what issue it is? And the one thing I didn't mention, one of the fun things about this job is because everything is medical, I'm learning all kinds of terms that I had no idea even existed. And that I think has been the fun part for me, is just understanding a lot of this stuff and how the body functions.
Now, since you work for Continuum XR, I suspect you guys probably do augmented reality too, right?
We do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you ever get involved in any of those projects?
Yeah, so we have done it where we've done like a complement AR app to the VR. And so I'm part of it, and the same person who creates our storyboard is the person who actually is our AR developer. And yeah, so we do a bit of both. They're not that different. I think AR is an interesting one because for me, it's harder for me to get more connected with it. But I think that's my sort of not being able to use tech side of like, what do we do this for? But there's someone, Betty Danowitz, and Destry Hillebrand, I want to say is his last name, who I followed, who do AR stuff that is really great. I'm not as well connected to that.
Yeah, I feel like the stuff that I've seen that in AR that has really impressed me are more of the technical stuff, and then soft skills. I feel like VR is just a little more suited to that, just because it is so crazy immersive.
Right.
Is there anything that you wish you knew? Well, anything that you know now that you wish you had known before you had started on this path as an instructional designer in VR?
I would say one, just play. It's one of those things. I think I'm very much a person who likes recommendations from people before I jump into anything. And what I learned very quickly is just have at it. You never know. Just shoot an idea out, see what happens, go from there. I would also say use your team. I think it took me months before I started to realize that my team found value in what was going on. And particularly because I'm a new VR user, I'm an asset to the team because I'm more like the customers that are going to use it. And so what I would think was hard for me, I wouldn't mention until later on. And they'd be like, well, that's a bug. Like it shouldn't be working that way. And because they're thinking about it in a very different way than I am, they didn't notice it. And whereas with me, I'm just like, oh, I thought that's how it's supposed to work. So I think speaking up, even when I think I'm wrong, is really an important thing. And also my dev team is awesome. Any questions that I ask them, they're very willing to answer. Or if I'm curious about something, has been very helpful. At one point I kept saying, and again, if you've used VR, you have to set up a guardian for play. And I kept reaching outside of my guardian, and someone said, well, you could just have the keyboard move closer to you. And I went, how do you do that? And it's just being able to use like the advanced settings, so to speak, of your controllers and being able to do that. And it's just simple things that they understand that I don't. Or I'm trying to think of other silly things that I did. I obviously wear glasses, and I didn't realize right away. I kept putting my contacts in every time I had to go into VR, which if you are doing a lot of testing that week is a terrible idea. And then someone's just like, you realize there are extenders, right? And so there's a little plastic extender that you have that you can put in there so that it adjusts to fit your glasses. But now I use that with my SMEs of, if you are going to have one headset per center, you can have one that's for people who have glasses, and that way they don't have to worry too much about that. And then also thinking about just how I can use the way that I interact with VR for my clients. Like, it's not just not helping just the dev team, it's making sure that I can share that information with the people who need it the most. That's probably the longer answer you wanted, but
no, it's so fascinating because all of this is just so practical, and so I love it. And we have a lot of questions like in here that I'm looking forward to asking you. Now, let me ask you this one: how much time do you yourself spend in virtual reality?
not a lot. I should spend more. I would say I'm super sensitive to movement in VR, so I get motion sickness. So we were actually doing a team event the other day and Echo VR, and you're flying around, you're moving, and I was gonna hurl. Like it's too much for me, and I'm typically the litmus test of our group of something's gonna make you sick. But that said, I think I try to go in like I like something like Beat Saber, which is like a Dance Revolution if you're a video gamer or arcade person, I should say. And like that's more my speed, or I like to just like listen to music. There's like a meditation app on there that I listen to quite a while. So not surprising that those are the things that I enjoy. Again, the video and the audio, like you don't have to do anything crazy. You just like capture words. I think it's called Where Thoughts Go. And it's well, like journaling. So I'm very into, there are certain things that I'm really into. And then the rest of my team, when they suggest games, you can tell that most of the team is male. We're killing people left and right. So I'm sorry that I don't assume that all men want to do that, but I was looking at them like, I understand why these games were chosen.
Right. Yeah, no, I really got it heavy into something called Space Pirate, which is just a shooter, but you're shooting drones in the sky, and it's like felt like I was in like an 80s arcade the whole time. It was just so fun. Yeah. How do you know, what do you do if like your learners are afraid of the technology?
I explained to them that when I opened my Quest, I had to have video with someone on my team to watch me open it because I was afraid of breaking it. So like again, as someone who's not into VR, that works to my advantage because I can tell them it's not scary. It's going to be okay. It's really just another technical advice that you have to track down the charger. And I wish they'd make every company a different color because I have more white cords than I know what to do with. And I think I just tell them, just like we walk them through it. The one advantage that we have is because we're part of a larger organization, we do have people who help with implementation. And so when we start, we walk you through it. It's an onboarding process with the headsets when they arrive, and just making sure that like you can put it on, you're comfortable with it. How do you feel? Like, are your lenses set the correct way? Because you have to adjust for that. How to set up a Guardian? Where do you need to be? All of that is done ahead of time. And then Oculus has something called First Steps, which walks you through some of the buttons on the controller and being able to try to figure it out. I think, honestly, just getting into a game would be very, very helpful. And it's something now that I think of as I'm building more simulations that I want to definitely get into more gamification type stuff. Because I think the greatest way to help people learn is to trick them into learning, in the sense that you don't start and say, hey, we're doing a simulation on like anger management. Instead, you make them like beat up stuff. And this, I'm totally making this up. This isn't something I've done, but you put them in that situation, not quite in the real world, have them do something that sort of shows out anger and stuff like that. And then you sort of sneak in the learning. Is the way I go about it.
Yeah. Have you been in a situation where you couldn't resolve like somebody's fear of the technology, or not wanting to deal with virtual reality?
No, most of our clients have been pretty good about it. Actually, I honestly, the AR app was harder than VR was. And I think it's because they know how to use a phone, and then you're adding this one other layer to it, and that was throwing them off. Whereas with VR, they listened more to what they were supposed to do because they didn't know how to move forward.
Yeah. Well, this is great. What I'm hoping is that, and the way that you're speaking on things, it does feel like if you're an instructional designer and you were at all like intimidated by wanting to work with it, with virtual reality, you shouldn't be, because this conversation, for me, you're just really communicating that the technology is a little different, but for the most part, you're going to learn on the fly, learn how to deal with a different type of platform, but it's still instructional design, right?
I would say, yeah. I think if you're flexible to learn, that's a really big part. If you are someone who wants to work with a team, that's really, I think, a big proponent about this. Working with your team is really good to understand what's going on. But the process is very similar to what I've learned is, in terms of working with SMEs and trying to figure it out, that none of that changes. It's very similar. I would argue the same.
Yeah. See, Valerie's saying, yes, thank you for making this ID feel less nervous about taking on VR.
I say
and
do
so,
it.
Yeah. Elizabeth is asking, have you been doing this work remotely, like on a remote team?
Oh yeah. So I've never met my team. I've only met my boss. I interviewed with him, and other than that, and we're all over the place. We're in different time zones. Oddly, that's one of the weird things that has stubbed me in the past is just remembering that a lot of people are an hour behind me, and then we have someone in Norway who's 6 hours ahead of us. So we have someone in Texas, we have someone in Colorado, we have someone in Alaska. So I mean, all right, that's the weird part is I'm used to working in an office, and I went remote with my prior job for a couple of months before I started here. So that has been very weird for me is to not be able to just stand in someone's office and or pick up the phone. I have to like Slack them and see if they're around or like email them. And that's just, I'd rather be in your face.
Yeah. Do you guys ever do any collaboration in VR? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, our company, a holiday party was in VR, and so it was really cool. We did we have like an amphitheater, so we did that, and so we like listened to a concert for like a little while, and then they did a lounge sort of area, so it was almost like a bar setup, so you could still talk to people in smaller groups. That was one way that we've done it before. So we tried to do that as a team. We're trying to do it about once a month or so. But honestly, I keep yelling at our person who's creating it. I'm like, it cannot be movement games. Can we like do something like sitting, please? Like, I don't want to move around too much.
Now, okay, so Valerie is asking, you mentioned AR and VR. Do you also do mixed reality? And honestly, I actually there's two things now I think about it. One, if you could just tell me real quick, what does when you say guardian, what is that?
When you put on your headset, what it makes you do is, so you can either do a seated experience or a standing experience, and it gives you about, like if I put it on, a box of like you draw a line as to where you are. So like the room I'm in right now has like a desk and whatever. So you work around that. And what the system will do is if you go beyond your boundary or your guardian, it will actually show you the real room so that you don't bump into anything. So that's what a guardian is. Yeah.
Okay, I get it. And then with this question from Valerie, she's saying, you mentioned AR and VR. Do you also do mixed reality, MR?
We don't, no.
Okay. All right. Because I'm not completely familiar. I get confused between XR, which is extended realities, right? Or
it also goes for mixed reality as well, I believe.
Yeah. And so that's kind of how I've understood it. Okay.
Yeah.
How about this one? How do you stay up to date with your professional development?
Oh, I'm a big old podcast person. I actually have two that I can drop in that I like. And I'll copy the links real quick. But one, TLDC has, and I don't know if they're all private or public, that's a podcast. That's one. And then let me pop the other one in there. So I listen to podcasts. I try to, if I have books now, I can try to do books if I can. I just try to talk to people. So like Community Day, when I met Luis, I reached out to him and asked to do a round table. I on different Slack groups. So I think just talking to different people who are doing it and just hearing from them that, it's okay that it took you 3 hours to find an image for an e-learning interaction. So I think it's very funny for me because I always think, well, that takes me too much time to do something, and they're just like, that's just how much time it takes, and you just need to accept that.
Yeah So typical stuff. Do you ever go to conferences or anything like that?
Yeah, so one of the last conferences I went to was ATD's ICE, the international conference, and so that's like something like 30,000 people or something ridiculous like that. And I loved it. I've never been so, like, I was a kid in a candy store, beyond excited. These were my people, and I was fascinated by it, and I loved it just because they thought of everything. At no point did I feel confused and someone didn't walk up to me and help me. And I think of, as you're thinking about VR and actually any interaction in an ID, you think about the user experience, about what they're thinking. Is this intuitive for them? And I think particularly in VR, does this make sense? Do they know that they can grab it? Do they know that they can touch it? How to interact with it? And I think regardless of what you're doing, whether it's e-learning or you're doing it in VR, you need to have that in the back of your head. And I think people in learning and development think about that. Like, what is the greatest way for them to know what's going on?
Is there anywhere that you can go to like talk to L&D colleagues that work in, with XR or VR or anything like that?
There are a few. So Debbie Richards is one that my mentor connected me with, and I think has actually been on this before.
Mm-hmm.
I think I probably need to get more involved in it, but there's been so much that has happened in the last year.
Yeah.
New job, new apartment, actually, COVID. It's been a lot, and I think probably in the last 2 months or so is when I started to get a lot more comfortable
Mm-hmm.
with the position, with saying that I'm an ID, and being able to understand that I belong in this community, not
Mm-hmm.
just because I like it, but because I feel like I have something to offer now, to just my team and to my clients. And that's been really important for me to branch out and think of different ways to sort of grab from other people what's going on. Because even thinking about storyboarding, we create that and they're just like, well, what is this? And I remember asking someone in a different Slack group, and they were just like, you should show people other clients, like, this is what it looked like originally, and then this is what the simulation looks like, and so that they can get that connection, that it seems like, all right, well, this is just a bunch of words, this doesn't make sense, but visually this is what's going to translate to at the end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Valerie has a recommendation in here, educatorsinvr.com. So we'll
Thank
have
you.
to check that one out. Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Valerie. Just a couple more questions because wow, we've gone a good amount of time with just without any breaks. So have
I'm
you
a
run?
chatty person. I
Yeah.
can't, but I actually will drop in a study too, just on VR and soft
Okay.
skills by PwC from last year.
Oh,
um,
nice.
cool. Sorry.
All right. So have you run into any performance issues colliding with training goals? And if so, how did you overcome it? That one's from Leonard.
No, I don't think we have. I think we've worked really closely with our SMEs to get them to know what's going on. I think if there's anything, it's me arguing ahead of time before it gets to the client and,
Mhm.
complaining. But usually I can get my way. And other times, if it's something that's an omission, I think we are very expressive with the client about why that is. We didn't
Mhm.
do this because XYZ. Either it wasn't good for the modality, or we didn't think that we had enough time to execute it as the way that we wanted to. So I, I think we haven't really had that many issues in terms of not executing on our business objectives.
Nice. Okay, that's great. And then last question from Rachel. And just give us a rundown on this. What is your development process for VR? Is there any way you can just give us just what that flow looks like, that workflow or that process?
In terms of the team, or like, I feel, I'm trying to think of what the best way to execute this is. So I think because we work on a sprint basis, so I work on it, I try to figure it out, I explain my vision to the team. So I work with our creative director and then the head of the developers, so our director of
Mhm.
engineering, share that with them. And then from there, we start to build it. And then they'll start to ask questions as things go. As I answer them, that will develop where we need to figure out any kinks that are in the line. Or they'll ask me a lot about what logic is behind it in terms of what needs to be changed. Like, does this make sense to do it this way, or can we do it this way? Are there not necessarily shortcuts, but is there a better way to go about this? So they will work with me to try to figure that out, and then we review that every week. And we also do testing as well. So we'll go into the headset, we'll see what it looks like. If there are any complaints, the whole team has sort of comments on that, and then we'll go back to the drawing board, make any edits, and then be able to present sort of like a video to our clients so that they
Mhm.
can see what it is without putting on their headset, and then from there continue on. So they're not too long. Does that answer the question?
I think so, but so I'm curious, do you typically just hand everything over to your graphic designer? You guys collaborate on what that storyboarding process looks like, and then she works with the developers, or do you get in there with her to work with the developers?
I work with her, and at this point, I actually talk to developers every day. So we do a stand up every morning. So that's where everybody talks about what they did the day before, what they plan on doing today, and anything that was holding them up. So I will talk to them during that portion of it, and most of the time it goes over my head. But if they have any specific client questions, is really where I come in, because they don't have a lot of those answers.
Wow. So is it one of those things when you have, when you do a sprint, they have something done. The developer's like, okay, put on your headset and check this out.
Yeah.
Are you most of the time like, whoa, this is amazing?
No, because at that point I'm testing.
Okay.
So it's an APK is what it stands for. And you put it on, and I'm looking for very specific things. And because I'm the holder of all the client information, I'm actually making sure that everything's correct. So I'm proofing essentially in VR. So I'm going in, looking at all of the setup at the beginning, making sure everything that we said was supposed to be there. Does this hit everything that I've asked for? How is this functioning in terms of what it looks like? All of that, copy wise, I'm in charge of that. Just making sure that it meets what was in my initial spreadsheet. Back to those spreadsheets. Yeah.
Elizabeth added a question. How long is this process?
It could take months, to be honest. We've done shorter periods of time, so like 3 months. But typically you should have a lot longer. It could be anywhere between like 9 months or longer. But it depends where you are in the process. And the projects that I've been on, they were in motion except for one when I started. So they already had an idea. And it also depends on how much we're doing with our technical artist, because he will create some things as well. He's awesome visually. And so he'll either draw it out and then create a 3D model available for us.
Wow, so fascinating. It absolutely is like one of the most interesting things to consider. I feel like you're pretty lucky to be able to do this stuff, but that's just my own geek like.
No. I am totally lucky that I not only got a new job, but I got it in this realm. Like, you know, like how many people start out as an instructional designer in VR? Like none that I've met, which is crazy. And I think what's very fortunate is that I work with a team who's very willing to help. Like they never seem upset when you ask a question. They actually encourage it, which is the environment that you want to be in.
Anything you can say about what you think the future of instructional design in virtual reality is going to be?
I think instructional designers eventually are going to have more control. So like in my case, I work with developers, but I think it's going to be moving towards a template-based thing where you can sort of drag and drop a little bit more. I think that's going to be interesting as to see how that works out. It'll be more, I think, easier for IDs to feel more comfortable, but I don't know if that limits the creativity that somebody's going to put into it. And that's one of the things that would make me nervous about it. And like, how does that organization help you? So like we worked very closely, and a lot of it is just custom built as to what the client wants, whereas that is more, yeah, like I said, drag and drop. So I think it's headed in that direction, but it's going to take a while before it gets there.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
All right, Monique, I think that's it. Thank you so much for answering all these questions. We had a bunch. I mean, yeah, we had a ton. So
yeah, I mean, we got through most of them, which is crazy.
yeah.
I would say the way that I would look at one last thing for VR is think of the acronym DIRE. And the way that they look at that is whether something is dangerous, whether it's impossible, risky, or expensive. And if that's the case, then you should do VR. Because if it's something that could easily be done as a live training or virtual training or e-learning module, then you should leave it there. But if you think that this is way too expensive to implement in any other fashion, or you think that immersion is the greatest way to get them into it, then you should try to do VR, assuming you have enough people and the budget to do it.
Wow. Okay, that's a good one. Is it okay if I post your LinkedIn profile for people to reach out to you if they want to connect?
By all means.
All right, there you go. You guys connect with Monique if you are at all interested in instructional design in VR. I know she's been already a wealth of information, just the small conversations I've had with her. And so, Monique, thanks for joining us today. I want everybody that is in the chat just to know tomorrow we're meeting with Trish Ewell and Christiana about the SEC mandate that I guess has, went through. I think it was the middle of last year or or in the fall, I think. And this SEC mandate does have some implications for instructional designers, basically just for talent in any organization. It's really worth tuning into tomorrow's episode and learning about what they have to say about that one. I've been kind of keeping up on it the last few months, and it's strange that people aren't talking about it more. Unless I'm really off on things, this is it's kind of relevant. So join us tomorrow, 8 a.m. Trishul, who is absolutely amazing. You'll want to tune into that one. All right, you guys. Monique, thanks again.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.